Well, I'm Maura. This is the kitchen. My kitchen, to be exact. You notice all the pots, pans, and such on a pegboard? It worked for Julia Child. It works for me. So, what are we going to be... Get my finger in the right place. What are we making in my big silver pot tonight? You'll soon find out. Okay, we're going to be making cream of mushroom soup. Now, the ingredients, all but one are sitting out here. I'll throw the one in here in a little bit. You won't miss it when I'm making it. Are very simple. They're very common. Many people, if they think cream of mushroom soup, they think, oh, can of condensed soup, dump it in a pan, heat it up, boom, it's done. I prefer not to use pre-made soups. Not that they're not great. I mean, I like them. I won't argue that. But when you're making a meal, it's not that difficult to make something like this, get it together, and really impress your friends and family. Now let's start with, if I walk sideways a little bit, we have the tripod that will be holding the camera for this episode. We have the very worn out 50+ year old kitchen sink, avocado green. Can't beat it. And if we go back, there's our stuff. Now this is the one big thing when I moved in I did. This is a 42-inch or 36. 42-inch cabinet underneath it. 36-inch cooktop. You've got, I think this is an 8,000 BTU burner, two 6,000s, a 4,000, and the big old 13,000. This is natural gas. The one before, we won't go too deep into it, but it was propane hooked to natural gas. There's no way it worked right. Got a good deal on this online. I love it the way it is. It's taken some work. Ignore the fact that the counter needs replaced. As I've mentioned in some of my blog posts, my kitchen's a little past dated. How in the world did I get a... One of my helpers didn't clean the stove all the way. Anyway, the backsplash is actually aluminum roof flashing that I bent and put in here. I did do HVAC for a while, so I've got the tools to bend and make my own. I wish I could have got it to where I could have done it in one piece and, not had a seam, but it is what it is. So, this is our work environment. As you can see, we've got 42, another 42, and about 2 foot, roughly. This is the entire countertop for the entire kitchen. You don't need a huge countertop. The thing you need with your kitchen counter is nothing on it but what you're doing. So, let's get going. And with any luck, you won't see my very worn out kitchen floor that is just as old as everything else in the kitchen. So, back at you in a minute. Okay, let's start with the ingredient that was missed. We're going to try and walk through this all the way through. Immersion blender, they aren't the cheapest of things. I'm pretty sure you could probably get a cheaper one. Being a former chef, I bought a higher end one. A nice chef's knife. You don't have to use a chef's knife. All you need is a knife you're comfortable with, that you like. Okay? White pepper, gorgonzola. Now you're going, wait a minute. I thought this was cream of mushroom. It is. This is a special ingredient. Cheap old beef base. Basil. Garlic powder. Cutting board. You notice the cutting board, everyone runs into this. The cutting board does not sit where you want. Damp. They commonly call these bar towels. It's best if it's damp. It will work dry. You can also get a piece of that kind of rubbery non-slip stuff for drawer liners. Notice it, you gotta really, you don't really, not really push, but it takes a little more effort to move it now. So, let's see, where are we going? Oh, what we need now is my special deal cheapo colander. I got this at one of those low price grocery stores, and they had them on clearance a few years back. So, let's see what happens if we roll you around past my ancient... Now, why is the tripod stuck? Come on, tripod, work with me. There we go. And, alright, past the ancient cabinets. Make some really thuddy video so everyone goes, whoa, Maura, stop. Okay. We have 2 pounds of mushrooms. Sorry, they're not in the shot all the way, are they? Okay. Get the scrub brushes out, the mushrooms in. Well, my helper didn't put that where it goes either. Okay. Now, mushrooms are, well, they're mushrooms. We won't go into how they're grown, how they're cultivated. Most people would say, oh, just brush them off. No. Well, how they're cultivated is in usually manure. Fancy word for horse poop. Now, you could brush horse poop off, but you're still going to have the remains of, get this, horse poop. So, let's get our water warm here because the water coming in is 44 degrees right now. Basically, you make enough of this stuff and you get kind of used to how to look quick, knock the stuff off. Yeah, rinses right down the colander and down the drain. When you're cutting this up, you'll notice if you miss something, you can toss it aside, rinse it off then. There's, you don't want that in your food. That's for certain. Now, a lot of people would skip, oh, well, we're just going to skip the prep course. No! Why do that? Why should you miss all the fun? You can see, I picked these mushrooms up this morning. They're getting kind of close to their expiration date. Mushrooms, I have discovered, come in 2 ways. Fresh, and they can sit for a couple of weeks, or you go to buy them and it's like, no, they're already starting to decompose. Which, when you think about mushrooms, is kind of funny. Whoop, come back here. There's box 1. Now, if you're into crafting or anything where you commonly need disposable containers to hold, paint or whatever, these things work great. I won't be keeping them though. I don't have the space. See, we're running into the problem that they're tight packed, and my fingers don't want to work quite right tonight. If any of you wonder, Maura, how do you do so well with your arthritis? You know, your fingers aren't shaped quite right anymore. It doesn't seem to faze you. Well, it does. But I was born with arthritis, so you know, you get kind of used to it. Actually, you don't even get used to it. It just is what it is. And it is one of the reasons I am not a chef anymore. Because it does cause trouble with that. Alright, now yes, I have a whole bunch of these bar towels. Alrighty, move the tripod. So you're looking at the nasty sink, and now you can see part of the floor and my granddaughter's step stool. And I realize there was another ingredient I missed. Hold on a second. All right, onions. Now, one nice thing with a little kitchen, everything's in arm's reach. How do I hold a mixing bowl on a pegboard? Maybe I'm in the wrong spot there. Okay. Binder clip. Put it on, flip it down, pegboard hook right there. Works beautifully. I worked with a chef that could slice these things up. She could have had these sliced before as I set the bowl. You know, I could set the bowl down and they'd have been sliced so fast. Again, there's a reason I am not a chef anymore. Well, technically I'm still a chef, but I don't do it for a living. And if you're curious, yes, I did sharpen the knife before I started all this process. And yes, I did the typical chef knife steel trick, where you get the steel rod, you sharpen it on. Now you may have heard other people say, don't scrape the blade across, use the back. Why is that? Because you take the edge off the blade. Even if it is a nylon board or a wooden board, you literally take the edge and rub it off. Part of my problem with this is I'm trying to not have too much dead air. Boy, that one went well. So you're not sitting here bored all night. sitting here bored as I cut 2 pounds of mushrooms up. Put these in the big silver bowl because they're getting in the way. Now, technically, you could use white mushrooms. They don't have as much flavor. They don't hold up in the heat as well. I guess you could use canned, but it would probably taste kind of funny. You can use about any mushroom you want. I just happened to get a deal on portobellos. And as I said, white mushrooms, they just kind of cook funny in this. They don't have to be real small. Or in any particular, direction of cut. If you think I'm skipping steps or something, you don't want to know how a commercial kitchen runs. There's an old saying, if you knew how your food was made, you wouldn't eat it. And that goes for processed food and stuff from commercial kitchens too. Yes, if you're a keen observer, you notice that I scraped the blade across there. But I scraped it along the same direction you would if you sharpened it. And let's face it, if you scraped the back, your hand is up against the sharp part. And that's not exactly the smartest place to have your hand. Trust me, I've seen a lot of neophyte chefs taken out pretty quick doing that. You could save time and buy these already sliced. I didn't have an option today because the already sliced ones looked worse than these. They were in sad shape. They were mushy. Yes, I know the name is mushroom, but not that mushy. Now, we've got our bowl pretty much sliced up. Now, we're going to do some that are smaller. These will be the first to go in the pot. mentioned it earlier, one advantage to a tiny kitchen is you can just reach around and grab whatever you need real fast. And you'll notice in all this cooking, all this cutting, the cutting board is not wiggling around. Almost had a casualty there. Now remember, anything you can do at high rates of speed, you can do in a crock pot. So if you live in an apartment and really don't have much of a stove, say you're in Manhattan where you're lucky to have a crock pot and a microwave that fits in a closet, apartment. Yeah, I know a few people that live up there. It's an inside joke with me and them. You can do this in a crock pot. How you time it is something that you're going to have to experiment with, but it can be done. I would not try it in an Instant Pot, just because it would be a little tricky. Maybe if you were in the saute function, but I'm not a big fan of the saute function. To me, it's too hot and the pot's too deep. If you wonder why chefs put their hand on that outside edge, part of it is control. Part of it just keeps you from sticking your fingers where they shouldn't ought to be. A bit of trivia: the most common way for people in a kitchen to wind up with a workman's comp claim is not the chef's knives. It is the lids when you open tin cans. People sticking their finger in to get the lid from inside the can. Well, once that lid is cut, it's about as sharp as a chef's knife. And it is very common for people where they go to get the lid, and you know how lids are, they tend to pinch in there. And when they pinch and your finger's in there and becomes the pinch point, they cut. And I've seen some nasty cuts from that. Okay, let's set the colander over here in the sink. Alright, now we have diced up mushrooms and sliced up mushrooms. Now for the part that most people hate, because it makes you cry. Now, if you're new to cooking, and you're like, wait a minute, why are you taking off that layer that isn't papery? That's because that layer is hard. It is, if you're putting it in a pressure cooker, you're pretty much okay. But if you're just going to cook, saute, and cook it into a soup or a stew, yeah, not so much. Some of these I will leave big and some I will make small, much like we did for mushrooms. Now you can, hopefully this is in the screen, this to an onion. Hold your fingers back out of the way. Look, instant dice, and then slice. Onions do not send many chefs to the ER because by the time you're cutting them up, you've dealt with them enough, you know what they will do. Okay. I worked with a chef for many years that could peel a potato with a knife that size and get you almost paper thin potato skins off of it. No joke. Lord rest his soul. Great guy. Learned a lot from him. Everyone gets surprised when they see how much onion goes in cream of mushroom soup. This one may not be good when we get, won't be all the way good. I can tell you that right here. Now again, if you knew what all was in your food, you probably wouldn't eat it. Some people would probably just toss this one. When you're in a production kitchen, which is what a restaurant is, you don't always have that luxury. And you can see most all of it came off with the outer skin when it peeled. So come back behind it, take it off, boom. The rest of the onion is just fine. If you think I've done this a few times, you're right. I'm not intending for it to go down that hard and slam into the cutting board. All right. Mushroom. Okay. Now, set the pan over a little bit. Grab our towel and move it closer to the stove. Set the trash to get rid of. Okay, most all of our ingredients are in place. Now, I'm going to shut you guys off, reposition the tripod, so we can get the stove in the scene here, and see if I can get it worked around where I can dodge it. So, as you could tell earlier, it's got a footprint to it. So, I'll be right back. Okay. Alright guys. You are literally on the stove over top of that great big burner. Which means I have to cook this, hope the lens doesn't fog up, because I can't turn the vent on because the microphone is directly beside the vent hood's vent. So, let's get going. I will not make you wait for the water to boil. We will skip the boiling part because that's about as boring as watching paint dry. So, let's make it hot under that pot. Corn oil. Small, easy pour container, recycled. Lost my train of thought. Yeah, I buy oil in gallon jugs, so yeah, the smaller container is much easier to work with. So, what are we doing with that oil? We're adding onion. Piece escaped right onto the cooktop. All right. Now I'll warn you guys up front. Like most everyone's oven mitts and cooking pan rags, yeah, I've got stains and such on these, so just kind of overlook it, will you? Butter works about the best for this, but corn oil comes in second. Standard vegetable oil works well. I just don't use it. I don't care for its flavor. I don't like its flash point. And it never fails. You never get enough oil in right off the bat. The lid, it's off my fingers. The lid holds the heat in, makes the onions cook a little bit faster. You got to take it on and off fairly frequently this way, but they cook a little bit quicker. You retain some of the moisture, so you're going to keep some more of that onion flavor instead of it evaporating out. a fancy restaurant may not do it that way. It may be sauteed in a frying pan and then poured into this later. We're doing this in one pot. You know, you have the cutting board and such like that, but basically one pot. Normally when I'm doing this, I would do this stage, get the water in, as the water's boiling, cut up the mushrooms, or I would have already had sliced mushrooms. Remember, never open a pan lid toward you. Always open it away. Nothing like a face full of steam to make you remember that one. Maura, you sound like you're talking from experience. Yes, I am. I learned that as a kid. The hard way. We're not really after the onions going translucent or transparent. Yeah, we're just waiting for them to cook. And see, they're still a little tough. The edge of the spoon works great for seeing if something's cooked enough yet. It's very close in sharpness to your incisors. And if you use the edge like a wooden spoon and it pushes through it, well, you know you're done. And now we have the boring part of watching water condense on the lid. Join us as we stand here and watch and wait and listen to Maura fill up dead air space, or we can listen to the onion sizzle. And again, don't open it toward you. In some cases, if you have something with a lot of oil in it and a low flash point, like say soybean oil, you can have a case of it spontaneously combusting, and then you're not just getting a face full of steam, you're getting a face full of, flames. If you need to put out a kitchen fire, either use a fire extinguisher rated for a kitchen, or an ABC, or salt. Don't use flour. Flour is combustible. Alright. Slowly add 6 cups of water because it is going to steam and pop. There's 4. And 6. Put the lid back. I will stir this occasionally, waiting for it to boil, but you don't really have to stir it too often. You just don't want the onions to sit in one place the whole time. So at this point, I'm going to turn the camera off because, like I said, waiting for water to boil is like watching paint dry. So we'll be back once it's boiling. Okay. For me, it's been 5 or 6 minutes. Maybe a little less. For you, hey, through the magic of start and stop. Okay. So now we have an onion slurry. What are we going to do with that onion slurry? Well, we're going to figure out where I set my measuring spoon. We're going to start measuring. There's 6 cups in there. The instructions for this say 2 teaspoons of base to a cup of broth. Well, okay, at that rate, 6 times 2 would be 12. So, we have our tablespoon measure here. No, I'm not flattening it out. 1, or 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. We aren't making broth, we're making base. So it takes a little more than the package says. All in all, it's still a good product. You'll notice we have not added any salt to this so far. That's because the base has enough salt in it. We don't need to add more salt. If you think it needs more salt, go right ahead. Take my word for it. The base is salty. And I have a person in the house who has a sodium restricted diet. Not me. Okay, now. So let's see. Yep, base is about right. Now, we're going to add white pepper. You can use black pepper. You'll find a lot of chefs use white because it doesn't put little black specks in your food. Now, basically, you're just gonna be careful with white pepper. It's a little stronger than black. For one thing, it's usually ground much finer. But it does have a little more potency than black pepper. Consider yourselves warned. If you like spicy food, you could put in some cayenne or some pepper flakes. A little bit more. And garlic. Yeah, you could really be fancy and use garlic cloves. But we're not being fancy, we're being what's on the shelf. And I'm the only one here that really uses garlic cloves. When my son was home, he did. But he's got his own place. This is to taste at this point. There's a reason it's not measured. You'll also find that a lot of chefs don't measure anything. If you really watch a real chef, not, you know, whatever the famous person is on, you know, the Stovetop Network or something. They're measuring so you get an idea. My first teacher for cooking was my dad, who learned from his mom. His mom didn't measure a thing, or at least she didn't think so. A lot of times it was just a handful of this and a handful of that, and she knew how much it was. You know, her hands never changed size in the whole time she was cooking, so it was always the same amount. Okay. Now, if you don't like basil, don't put basil. I like basil. I like the flavor of basil in cream of soups. Now the trick here is, much like blowing on a toddler's spoon before you give them their food, by blowing across it, you keep the steam from going into the jar and making your basil rot. The steam goes away, the basil goes in. Trust me, you do not want steam in your basil, or your oregano, or any other dried spice for that matter. Garlic, yeah, I use enough of that so fast. I think we go through a bottle every couple of weeks. Perfect. First try. All right. Now, Worcestershire sauce, or Worcestershire, I'm not sure how you say it. Is, other than someone who lives in this place in England, is there anyone that knows how to say it? We're not adding a lot. Roughly a tablespoon. If you smell it, you put enough in. Because that will be all you will smell at first. You'll notice none of these ingredients are, high-end. You don't need high-end ingredients. You just need patience and a little time. Time isn't T-I-M-E, unless you're making poultry. Okay. Now, at this point, we add our chopped up mushrooms. And if you're wondering, gee, Maura, that's a lot of soup. Well, I'll have leftovers. But I like mushroom soup, so leftovers are not a problem. Now, wait for it to come back to a full boil, which really won't take long at this point. Mushrooms heat up much quicker than you would think. But they're primary, they're just fiber and water mostly. And at this point, you do have to kind of stir it. You don't want it scorching. Especially here in a couple of minutes, and you'll see why. You can make this thinner. You can use fewer mushrooms. One of the people in the house prefers things that are closer to stew. And it's just easier to make it thicker than argue. Now we can see right along the edge here that we are starting to boil. You won't get as full a rolling boil because the mushrooms are going to interfere at first. So we're starting to get it here. There's some more. Now these are not a cheap pan. I will admit I bought good pans. These are these are real stainless steel with a 1/2 inch thick aluminum clad bottom. The stainless gives you all the advantages of stainless. The thick aluminum bottom helps spread the heat out. You can go cheap in a lot of places in your kitchen. Don't go cheap on your pans. Okay, Gorgonzola. Now, this is a nice strong cheese. If you want it a little milder, go with blue. If you want milder yet, use feta. But basically, it's going to have the same effect regardless. This is a 5-ounce container. We're going to put, maybe 3 ounces in. Yeah, about 3. See, off camera, I'm using one of those bar towels to wipe my hands or hand. Now, mix that through. You see there's a subtle color shift here from dark brown to brown. flavor shift is intense. I figured this out eating some soup made by a local caterer. Took some working. I worked it out. Sort of reverse engineered it. It's not exact, but I kind of like mine better. Could just be because, you know, I made it. Yeah. Now. Oh, silly me. I forgot to pull the plug out of the cream bottle. Okay. Heavy whipping cream. Don't use that crazy half and half. You won't get the same flavor. You saw this color shift all of a sudden if you were paying attention. If not, well, rewind. Look again. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, that's maybe half a cup in 6 cups of beef base. You're not adding tons to this. Don't be afraid to constantly taste your cooking. If you're afraid to constantly taste it, why are you in the kitchen? Perfect. Now, we're going to kill the heat. I'm going to move the pan and move you guys because, well, maybe. Hold on a second. Ah, just short of reaching. Okay. I'm going to move you guys and move the pan, and we'll go into the next step and then move you back. So, hang in there. Okay, if you thought y'all were precariously perched before being up in the range hood, well, now you got one leg in the kitchen sink. So, here's where the immersion blender comes in. Stick it in. Careful not to swap it everywhere. You hold a slight tilt, this works better. Otherwise, it sucks itself to the bottom of the pan. You don't necessarily have to do this step. Get all the onion off it. Whatever else didn't immediately pulverize. Okay, now if I get my spoon back, all those little pieces are now ground up. So, back to the cooktop. Whoop, and not try and beat the pan up in the process. Okay, well, let's get you back on the pot here. Kind of hard to get you back exactly where you were. This doesn't have to be exact, as long as you can see what's going on. Okay, let's light the fire again. Now, we're going to thicken this up a little so it's not as, soupy. To be honest, you're going to use cornstarch, and I'm going to disappear on you again in a minute. Now we'll go, let's see here, 6 cups of liquid, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, anyone that's made gravy knows you can thicken with cornstarch, or you can thicken with flour. Flour has its advantages. Cornstarch has its advantages. Cornstarch thickens very quickly. Flour takes a little longer. Flour, back in a minute. Flour, when you store leftovers, does not turn into pudding. Cornstarch, well, it tries to turn into pudding, especially if you put too much in. Now, I've dissolved this with cold water. Trust me, the water is cold. It's like 44 degrees, if I didn't mention that earlier. I'm going to stir it till it's not there. Do not put cornstarch straight in your soup. You won't get thickening, you'll get lumps. Same as gravy. Okay, start stirring. And we're going to drizzle this in. And I measured it out because I know roughly how much, but batch to batch, it varies a little bit. You can kind of see it thickening up. The effect of the cornstarch is pretty much instant. And I mean instant, as you can see. Flour takes a little longer to tell. In a commercial environment, they would use cornstarch because of speed. They don't have time to have a line cook standing there playing around with, is this thick enough yet? When will the Johnson's order be done? Well, as soon as the gravy gets thick. And you probably have a maitre d' going, sacre bleu, something along those lines. Now we kill the heat. Because it's boiling a little much. Still, we're a little soupy. Now, if your immersion blender would reach all the way over here, like mine does not, you could use that again. You can actually use those in the pan while it's boiling. Use caution. Use your head. Boiling liquid is boiling liquid. And when it's thickened, well, it's a viscous boiling liquid. Alright, we are not as soupy, not as watery, but we are about the consistency of soup, which is what we're wanting. You can also thicken it with potato flakes. Potato flakes make an excellent thickener in a cream of soup. And now, we add the rest. My oven that I forgot to grab, because if you haven't guessed, that handle's hot. Now, we do not need to turn the heat back on. The last of the mushrooms don't get cooked as long as the first. That gives you a nice firm mushroom to bite into, not the mushy stuff like the beginning was. I might have overdid the thickening a little bit. But you know what? Chefs make mistakes too. So, that sits about 5 to 10 minutes like that, and it's ready to serve. So, until next time, guys, watch your fires. Pay attention to what you're doing. Anyone can do this if you just take the time. I'll see y'all later.